Welcome to Life Stories. What would you do if the man who broke your heart showed up at the reading of his father's will, holding his newborn baby with the woman he left you for, only to find out you just inherited everything? Not him, not her, you. But that's only the beginning. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about a woman who lost everything, her marriage, her dreams, her sense of self, and the man who saw her worth even when no one else did. But what he left behind, that changes everything. Stay with us, because what starts as heartbreak slowly unravels into a secret that challenges everything she thought she knew about love, family, and who James Whitmore really was. Let's begin. The call came just as Claire Whitmore was sealing the final jar of plum preserves. Rain whispered against the kitchen window, the kind of late September drizzle that made the whole world feel like it was holding its breath. Her tiny cottage smelled of sugar and spice, comfort and memory. Then the phone rang, sharp, unexpected, and her hand jerked. The glass slipped. It shattered on the tile floor, sweet jam bleeding like a wound. Claire Whitmore. The voice was clipped, formal, male. "This is David Reed. I'm a notary. I'm calling with unfortunate news. James Whitmore passed away last night." Claire didn't answer. She sat down hard in a chair, glass crunching beneath her slipper. Her fingers, still sticky, trembled against the phone. I just saw him," she whispered. "Last week, we had tea. He was talking about building raised beds in the garden this spring. He looked fine." "Heart failure," David replied. "It was sudden, peaceful for her. He passed in his sleep." Claire closed her eyes, and for a moment she could see him. The sharp eyes behind old-fashioned glasses, the beard carefully trimmed, the warmth in his voice when he called her kiddo. James hadn't been her father. He'd been Ethan's, her ex-husband's. But after the marriage fell apart, James stayed, called, listened. He'd told her she was family. And Claire, too ashamed to admit how much she still needed him, never said thank you. "There's something else," David continued. "James left a very specific request. He wanted you at the reading of the will, this Wednesday, 11 a.m. at my office. He also left you a personal letter. He was adamant." Claire barely heard the rest. She wrote down the address mechanically. Rain blurred the world outside the window. Something inside her began to crack open. She hadn't been to the Whitmore house in over 2 years, not since the day she discovered Ethan's affair. Brooke, a 29-year-old junior associate from his firm. Claire hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown anything. She simply left, packed her bags, moved into a tiny rental near the lake, and resumed the quiet life she thought she'd left behind when she got married. They never signed the divorce papers. Ethan kept putting it off, said it wasn't a priority, said life was complicated. Now she was being called back into a world she'd carefully escaped. And something about the notary's tone haunted her. That final letter, the urgency in James's voice when he last asked her to visit. He'd been fine, but his eyes had lingered on her face a little too long, as if trying to memorize it. She hadn't gone to the funeral. Couldn't bear to see Ethan with his perfect new life. With Brooke. And the baby. Yes, there was a baby now. George, born just 3 months ago. The child Claire once dreamed of having with Ethan. On Wednesday morning, Claire dressed in a tailored black suit she hadn't worn in years. The sleeves were tighter now. Her once chestnut hair was streaked with silver. James used to say it made her look regal. A silver crown for a queen, he'd told her. She hadn't dyed it since. Outside, the rain had returned, a slow drizzle that chilled the skin. Claire took a cab, couldn't bear the thought of waiting for the bus, soaked and shivering, to face the woman who had unmade her life. When she stepped onto the curb outside David Reed's historic office building, she saw them immediately. Ethan, heavier than she remembered, in a navy coat. Brooke beside him, cradling the baby, her expression tight, calculating. Her lipstick smudged, her hair pulled into a haphazard bun. Motherhood hadn't been kind. Ethan met Claire's eyes. His nod was curt, impersonal. Brooke clutched the baby closer. Claire almost turned around, almost hailed a cab and fled. But she remembered James's voice, his worn hands pouring tea, the pride in his garden. She walked forward. Inside, the office was warm, dark-paneled, filled with the scent of wood and paper. David greeted them with the solemn efficiency of a man who'd done this too many times. "We're here to read the final will and testament of James Whitmore," he began, eyes scanning the group. "Please, introduce yourselves." "Ethan Whitmore," Ethan said, straightening in his seat. "Only son." "Brooke Whitmore," Brooke added swiftly, "his wife." Claire opened her mouth, closed it, then spoke calm and clear. "Claire Whitmore, legally still his wife." Brooke's lips twitched. Ethan flushed a mottled red. David didn't react. Noted. "Let's begin." He pulled out a document, adjusted his glasses, began reading. "To my son Ethan, I leave nothing." The silence that followed was seismic. Claire's heart stopped. Brooke gasped. Ethan stood. "What the hell are you talking about?" David lifted a second page. Mr. Whitmore was of sound mind. The will was notarized, witnessed, and accompanied by a psychological evaluation confirming full capacity. "To Claire Whitmore," he continued, "I leave all that I own, the city apartment, the lake house, all financial assets, and a property in Harborview, which I purchased for her. It is my hope she finds there what the world so often failed to give her: peace, purpose, and the space to begin again." Brooke dropped into her chair. The baby began to cry. "No," Ethan breathed. "This is fraud. This is insane. You manipulated him." But David was already unfolding a letter. "Mr. Whitmore also asked me to read this, aloud, in the presence of all parties," he began. "My dear Claire, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for the shock, but I had my reasons. I saw your pain. I saw how you kept showing up even after the world stopped noticing you. Ethan never knew your worth, and I failed in teaching him. So now I leave you something he never gave. A choice. What you do with this gift is up to you. But please, don't waste it. Love, James." Ethan said nothing, just stared at the floor. Brooke was already on her phone, texting furiously. And Claire was trembling. Not with guilt, not with fear, with something dangerously close to freedom. What would you do if the person who once broke you returned, claiming to have changed? Can a new beginning ever truly erase the past? She stepped out into the rain, James's words echoing in her mind. Unaware that the key to Harborview held more than just bricks and beams, it held a secret James never dared say aloud, and someone else knew. Claire didn't remember much of the ride home, only that the rain had turned heavier, as if the sky itself were trying to wash the day clean. She sat curled up in the back seat of the cab, James's letter clutched in her hand like a lifeline. It felt too enormous to be real, too vast a gesture from a man who had no obligation to love her, and yet somehow had loved her more completely than the one who had once vowed to. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the glow of the street lamps reflecting on wet pavement, a mug of cold tea untouched in her hands. Over and over, she whispered his name. James, the man who'd seen her, who remembered how she liked her tea and always asked about the books she was reading, who had once told her that a quiet heart was not a weak one. And now, even in death, he had changed everything. By morning, her decision was made. She would go to Harborview, not for the inheritance, not out of revenge, but because James had seen a future for her when she could no longer imagine one. The next few days passed in a blur of logistics, quitting her job at the community center, packing her things, forwarding her mail. Ethan called once. She didn't answer. He didn't call again. It wasn't until she stood at the edge of the small coastal town that the weight of what she was doing hit her. Harborview was postcard perfect. Winding streets, white shutters, the smell of salt and rosemary in the air. The kind of place people passed through in summer and dreamed of returning to in winter. The house James had bought stood at the end of a cobbled lane, tucked behind a garden half wild with autumn bloom. Claire's breath caught when she saw it. 2 stories of soft gray stone, sea-worn shutters, and a covered porch that looked out toward the water. It wasn't just beautiful. It was intentional. Every inch of it felt like it had been imagined with her in mind. Inside, the space smelled of cedar and something faintly sweet, like old books or memory. Furniture had already been arranged. In the kitchen, a stack of her favorite recipe books sat on the counter. In the living room, a framed photo of James and Olivia. His late wife smiled down from the mantel. On the dining table lay another letter. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Claire, this house is more than a place. It's a doorway. What's on the other side is entirely up to you. But before you decide, there's one more thing you need to know. Someone else has a key. She read it 3 times. Someone else? A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, a man stood there, tall in his early 60s, with a wind-burned face and eyes the same storm gray as the sea behind him. He wore a fisherman's sweater, carried a canvas duffel, and looked more surprised to see her than she was to see him. "You're Claire," he said, voice low. "I guess that makes this complicated." She hesitated. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "Name's Hank Callahan. I was a friend of James. We served together. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should come here." Claire stepped aside. He didn't move. "He also told me this place wasn't just for one of us." The words fell into the hallway like a stone. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice suddenly smaller. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was another letter, also from James. Identical stationery, the same neat, meticulous handwriting. James had written to them both, separately, but about the same house, the same hope, the same key. "I don't understand," Claire said. "I think," Hank replied, "he didn't want either of us to be alone." They stood in silence. A storm wind whistled around the porch beams. "I won't stay," Hank said at last. "You clearly knew him better. I was just a chapter, one he closed a long time ago." "Wait," Claire said, her voice hoarse. "What kind of friend were you?" Hank's eyes softened, and for a moment, something fragile passed across his face. Something she recognized all too well. "I loved him," he said simply, "once, a long time ago, when the world was a different place." Claire's breath caught in her throat. James Whitmore, decorated veteran, devoted husband, mentor, father, and possibly a man who had spent his life loving more quietly than anyone had ever noticed. She looked down at the letter again. Someone else has a key. It wasn't a riddle, it wasn't a metaphor. It was the beginning of another story she didn't know she was part of. And suddenly, the house didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a mirror. What would you do if someone else was written into the chapter you thought was only yours? Would you open the door, or close it forever? Claire stepped back, eyes locked on Hank's, knowing this wasn't the end of something, but the start of a truth far more complicated than she ever expected. And someone was still keeping secrets. The house felt different now. It wasn't just the furniture or the scent of the sea drifting through open windows. It was the way time hung in the air, thick, charged, as if the walls had absorbed years of things unsaid. Claire stood in the living room, James's final letter still trembling in her hands, while Hank remained on the porch, not pushing his way in, but not turning to leave either. They were two strangers bound by a man who had seen them both in their solitude, and somehow thought they might complete what he could not. She could have asked him to leave. She could have locked the door and protected the version of James she'd carried in her heart, the wise father figure, the steady light in the chaos. But that image had already fractured, and beneath it was something far more human, messy, complex, and heartbreakingly real. "Come in," she said finally. Hank hesitated, then stepped inside. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. She poured tea out of habit, the way she always had with James, and they sipped in silence. For a long time, neither spoke. The ticking of the old wall clock was the only sound between them. "How long?" she asked quietly. "A lifetime," Hank replied. "Or close to it. We met in 1978, Vietnam. I was reckless. He was calm. Everything I wasn't." Claire blinked slowly, trying to reconcile the man she had known with the young soldier Hank was describing. "He married Olivia," Hank said. "I married a woman too. We did what we had to back then. The world didn't leave room for people like us, to be honest." "And afterward?" Claire asked. "We drifted, then reconnected. Christmas cards, phone calls. Then, after Olivia passed, he called me more often. We talked about old times, about regrets, and sometimes about beginnings that never began." Claire swallowed hard. "He never told me." "I don't think he told anyone," Hank said gently, "except maybe in those letters. I think this house, this was his way of telling the truth without saying it out loud." The waves crashed in the distance, slow and rhythmic. Claire turned toward the window. The sea beyond was vast, unknowable, like James. "I thought he left this place for me," she whispered. "A gift for a broken woman." "He did," Hank said, "but he left it for me too. And maybe that's the gift we didn't expect. Not the place, but each other." Claire looked at him, at the weathered face of a man who had loved quietly and waited a lifetime without promise or claim. She wasn't sure what she felt: grief, betrayal, or awe at the deep, painful kind of love that asks for nothing in return. The next morning, she walked the edge of the shoreline, shoes in hand, the cold water licking her toes. Above her, the sky stretched wide and pale, a canvas waiting for color. She thought of Ethan, of the years wasted on a love that eroded slowly, like stone against tide. And she thought of James, how he had seen her when she couldn't see herself, how he had built a life around the silence he never dared break. Back at the house, Hank was working in the garden. He moved slowly, carefully. She watched from the porch for a moment before stepping down. "I don't know what he wanted us to be," she said. "Maybe he didn't either," Hank replied. "Maybe he just wanted us not to be alone." They spent the next few days orbiting each other gently, cooking, cleaning, sharing short stories about James, the same man through different eyes. Hank's memories filled in parts of the man she hadn't known, his fierce loyalty, his dry humor, the way he always left the light on when he was waiting for someone to come home. And Claire shared her own. The apple pies he loved, the way he always remembered her birthday, even after she and Ethan separated. The time he stayed on the phone with her for 2 hours just because she sounded tired. One evening, a letter arrived, this one addressed to both of them. It had been mailed the week before James died. Inside was a photograph, decades old, of James and Hank standing on a beach, arms slung over each other's shoulders, sunburned and laughing. "If you're reading this, then the two people I loved most are sitting in the same room. I never had the courage to live the life I wanted, not fully. But I've seen you both survive loss, loneliness, and the weight of silence. If there's any chance that something good could grow between you, please let it. Don't live half a life like I did." Claire couldn't breathe. She stepped outside, down to the garden, to the edge of the earth. The wind was picking up. She stood still until she felt Hank behind her. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "and I don't know if I ever will be, but I think I can be better." They didn't speak for a while. Then Hank reached into his coat pocket and handed her a single violet. "He told me you liked these." Claire took it, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes filled without breaking. The cafe opened 2 months later. They called it the second light, after something James once said: "The first light in life is given. The second, you have to build yourself." Locals came for coffee and stayed for the silence that wrapped around the place like a blanket. Tourists wandered in, drawn by the soft music and the smell of warm bread. And every afternoon, Claire arranged fresh violets on each table. As for Ethan, he showed up one day, unannounced, stood at the threshold of the cafe, hands in his pockets, eyes filled with something between regret and longing. "I didn't come to fight," he said. "I came to see if you were happy." "I am," she replied, voice calm. "For the first time in my life, I think I really am." He nodded. "Then I'll go." "Wait," Claire said. He turned, surprised. "Thank you for the ending. Without it, I wouldn't have found the beginning." He smiled, a real one, and walked away. That night, Claire sat by the fire, while Hank read aloud from a collection of old letters James had left in the study. Words filled the space where absence had lived for so long. And slowly, between grief and memory, a strange peace settled. Not a perfect ending, but a true one. How did this story make you feel? Did it change how you see love, loss, or second chances? Comment 100 if this story moved you. Let us know what country you're watching from, and don't forget to share this video with a friend. Thank you for being here with us on Life Stories.